Hi, I'm Lindsay Christian. Welcome to Sarder TV, an idea sharing platform founded by Russell Sarder. He's an author, investor, and the CEO of Netcom Learning. So today I'm interviewing John Rossman. He's the author of Think Like Amazon, 50 and a half Ideas to Become a Digital Leader. Just so you know, John was responsible for launching the third-party marketplace at Amazon back in 2002, so he's going to share insights and wisdom that he gleaned from his experience and from CEO and founder Jeff Bezos. Thank you so much, John, for joining us here at Sarder TV.
Thanks for having me.
All the way from SoCal.
Southern California, that's right.
Well, we're glad we have beautiful weather just for you.
It is a gorgeous spring day.
It is a lovely day. All right, let's jump into this. Who is John Rossman? What defines your brand?
Yeah, so I'm an advisor to companies and leaders who are trying to figure out how to compete in the digital era. So I'm an engineer, I'm a problem solver, and I'm a practical strategist. And I love working with teams and companies that are trying to figure out what's the future for them, using all the tools, both business models and technology, and understanding their ecosystem. But that's what I like to do, and I think I'm pretty good at it.
What has been the secret to your success? 20 plus years working for some major companies. What's the secret?
Well, I think I've just always been curious, right? And so I like digging into topics, and I'm not scared of kind of stepping out of my direct realm of expertise and digging in and learning new topics. But I think I'm also a very practical person, and so I always bring things down to, well, what can we do, and how do we box something so that it's a right-sized project and investment and test it. And so I think that combination of being willing to learn new topics but bringing it back and being practical and making, business value, creating business value through the progress is kind of the key to my success.
Problem solver, you're curious. 20 years in your career.
Longer than that.
Longer than that. Okay, I'm keeping you young there, John.
Thanks.
You worked at, I call it the behemoth known as Amazon.
Yeah.
Where you were solving many problems every day, and we were talking about this earlier. You have so many wheels spinning. What effect did Amazon, working at Amazon, have on your life?
Yeah, so I was at Amazon from early 2002 through late 2005. I got to launch the marketplace business at Amazon. I have a business partner that I've worked with both before Amazon and post Amazon, and the thing Steve always says to me is, John, when you came out of Amazon, what you're always doing is clarifying and simplifying. So you really worked at like how to take a conversation or a bunch of ideas or a bunch of noise, and how do you clarify and simplify to then get to, well, what's the simple plan we're going to do going forward? But Amazon impacted me in so many ways because there's so many practical strategies and tools that they use, depending on the situation, to get the kinds of results. And I had the opportunity to put a lot of those tools into practice with my clients after Amazon, and that's what led me into writing the books that I've written.
And not only that, you obviously drew a lot of inspiration and wisdom from Jeff Bezos, who I'm sure you learned so much from, and that's a great segue into what would Jeff do. A lot of people are asking, what would Jeff do, right? How would he solve a problem? How would he handle this business matter? And that was the impetus to you writing your book.
Well, I get to speak to a lot of audiences. I get to work with a lot of teams. I get asked a lot of questions, which all are some variety of, well, what would Jeff do? How would Amazon think about this? Is Amazon going to compete in this business, and things like that? And while it's hard to predict what they'll do, how they'll go about it is actually very predictable. And those are the 50 and a half ideas that are in the book. And so, yeah, that was definitely kind of the inspiration for the book, was all the variety of questions that I work with clients on solving.
And you address, I'm sure, many questions in 50 and a half ways, a very micro, almost to the granular perspective of how to approach varied business practices. You really are offering a playbook, if you will, of ideas, and your challenge to businesses is reading these ideas and applying them to their businesses. Is that how I interpret it?
That's right, and it is a big playbook. And so the first moves are not how do I apply 50 of them, it's how do I take 2 or 3 of them and make them a practice a new habit, right? Creating a new habit, like lifelong learning, takes repetitive commitment to it. And so figure out the couple of these ideas that might help you move faster, create more accountability, think differently about your ecosystem and your business, to innovate, and then apply those over time, and then go on to the next set, right? And so it is a big playbook, and in no way is the recommendation to take a majority of those and put them into motion.
I mean, that would be challenging, but you're giving them a few things to work
Absolutely.
with, and you want to promote the idea of competing in a digital era. Like, why that concept?
Well, I think that is what really defines the future, right? Which is using what we think of as disruptive technologies, but it's really disruptive business models, and it's really disruptive customer engagement approaches, right? And so I think that word digital kind of encompasses the era we're in and that we're going to continue to be in. And so to me, what this is all about is, stop complaining and start competing. And, that is, I think, what too many senior leaders do, is they don't figure out. It's like, okay, it's a new playing field, a new set of tools, new approaches. We have to be willing to put aside even those things that made us successful in the past. Those are likely the things that might hold you back from competing in the future and creating, the next version of yourself. And one of the things I admire about Amazon is that you've seen them be willing to challenge even their own core beliefs and just look at what's the future. And that's what you have to do as a leader. So an example of where Amazon's done that is it's been in retail stores. When I was at Amazon, we were so proud of we're a pure e-commerce business and all the advantages we had over brick and mortar retailers. Well, 7 or 8 years ago, Amazon obviously challenged themselves. They started experimenting with the Amazon bookstores. Then they took a big step forward with the Whole Foods acquisition. You're going to continue to see them build and understand physical presence stores. The Amazon Go store is a great step forward, but that's because they're willing to challenge their own strategies and their own beliefs.
One thing you do, one of the ideas that you write about, and you mentioned this just a minute ago, is not really looking at what you've done, but you advise businesses to reset the clock. What does that mean?
So that notion of resetting the clock is what most companies are used to, is very short-term investments expecting short-term results. And for some types of initiatives, that's the right way to think about them. But if you're going to compete differently, reset the tempo of your organization, how you work together, how you create accountability, how you iterate and launch new capabilities, that's a long game. And so what you have to understand is one of the things Amazon does is they're willing to invest over a long period of time, and that allows them to try things and to be patient with things that other companies can't, simply because of the time horizon they're competing on. And so for some initiatives and some of your strategy, you need to reset the time horizon that you're thinking about.
A lot of companies want that microwave results, right? But
That's right.
It's more of an oven mentality. It's going to take a while to bake it.
And if you are truly in the innovation business and doing things new, those are not about fast, short-term results.
And I know you've advised companies that it's okay to experiment, it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to fail, but you got to pick back up and restart.
Yeah, and really I think that word, kind of fail fast and all of that, what that really is about is learn fast, right? As an organization, you have to learn fast. So you need to make your investment small so that they can be incremental. You have to be very good at understanding what's the hypothesis, what's the test I need to do to prove out the next important step, and then do just the minimum. So the minimally viable product, all of those agile concepts are about doing just enough to test, evaluate, and then proceed forward accordingly. And so really failure is about learning, and both as an organization and as leaders, that's the testing approach we need to put in place.
You successfully launched the third-party business at Amazon.
The marketplace business.
The marketplace business in 2002. Describe the 3 core principles you implemented to execute. But first, let's explain to our viewers exactly what you did. What is this third party, the
Yeah,
marketplace?
Yeah, the marketplace.
And then what were some of the principles you used to successfully execute that?
2002, the Wayback Machine, right? Amazon was a very small company. 90% of the business was books, music, video. eBay was the kingpin marketplace e-commerce business.
What's that not anymore?
Right. And Amazon knew that they needed to expand it in categories and that they didn't have all the merchandising expertise, nor wanted to float all of the inventory required. So we knew we needed a third-party business where other sellers, other partners would be the seller of record, but where the customers would come through Amazon.com. But we also knew that we didn't want the type of experience customers were having at other marketplaces at that time. We wanted a customer to trust buying from a third-party seller at Amazon as much as they trusted buying from Amazon, the retailer. And so in order to do that, that was the kingpin principle or idea, was trust. And that you needed to trust as a customer buying from a third party as much as you trusted buying from Amazon, the retailer. And so that imposed a tremendous amount of complexity, both for Amazon and our sellers, very different choreography and engagement model and expectation setting with our third-party sellers. But we also knew that we had to scale it. We envisioned hundreds of thousands of sellers. I don't think we envisioned the millions of sellers that there are now, over 3 million. And 58% of all units shipped and sold now are through the marketplace business. That was in Jeff's recent shareholder letter. But I think it really does come from those principles of understanding our customer and what our brand was, and that our brand was centered around trust. So we needed to architect an approach that built both scale and trust in it.
Well, I trust Amazon.
Right, exactly.
Right? And I don't know, it's just the brand credibility and my experience in purchasing items.
And that credibility is built on every single transaction, right? It's the trust and the transparency that the right item is going to get there to the right address at the right time and the right quality. And if there is an issue, guess what? Amazon's going to be proactive about it, right? They're going to communicate. They're going to communicate it. They're going to give you options. They're always going to vote in your half, right? On your behalf. And so that's trust can actually be defined and operationalized and then measured.
What are some of the biggest mistakes? We're talking about innovation. You thought of this idea to connect what's now 3 million right. vendor sellers to Amazon, but what are some of the biggest mistakes companies make when it comes to innovation? Like where should they be pumping the brakes and not go so fast?
Right. Well, there's a lot of mistakes that companies make, but the two I would talk about is, first is that when it truly is a new idea, we call those bets at Amazon. A bet is something you don't know if it's going to work or not, right? That is the definition of what a bet is. Big companies don't understand making a bet versus just a smart investment. And they intermingle those two types of investments, so they have the same approval process, the same governance process, and the same heavyweight approaches to them. You need to deal with bets very differently than you do other types of programs and investments. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two that I'll talk about is when they do have a winner, right? A great idea. What happens? Well, they immediately shoot for the moon, right? And so they commit to scaling it, they commit to the street, they commit to budgets and finance without having it to perfection, right? And perfection means both the customer experience, the operational aspects of it, the unit cost basis. All aspects have to be perfected. And so there needs to be this in-between phase of we've tested an idea, it's great, and scaling. There's an in-between phase that's called incubation. And that incubation is when you're getting everything about it right, and you have to be patient, and it's hard to predict exactly how long is it going to be until I'm ready to scale. But leaders get so impatient because they know they have a winner, so we're going to commit to it, and that's where some of the mistakes happen.
You have to take your time.
You have to take your time.
I like that you mentioned the bet part. It's almost kind of like bet on yourself, right?
Right.
In business, or if you have an idea, but taking a risk it's okay to take risk, right?
It is. In fact, I think that at a corporate level, there's, the biggest risk they have is that they're not taking enough bets on the future. But don't confuse thinking big with betting big. You need to have a big vision. And so a big part of innovation is being able to articulate and envision the future, but then you got to be able to dial it back to small incremental bets. And neither of those two are the natural orientation of most really good operational leaders.
Let's talk more specific, a little business jargon, the flywheel.
Yeah.
How is that important to a business strategy? First of all, what is a flywheel?
Yeah.
And how is that important to creating a really successful business strategy?
Yeah, so a flywheel is a type of systems model that just shows the interconnectivity between different pieces of your business or of the ecosystem, the competitive landscape that you operate in, and how they influence each other. So on one hand, it's a great way of understanding and developing your strategy, but then it's also, the flywheel is a really simplified version of it that's great for communicating to your employees, communicating to your stakeholders, communicating to broader participants of this is what we're going to. And the concept of a flywheel is it's virtuous in nature, meaning if we get the momentum going, it's going to create more momentum, right? And so you're creating a momentous wheel, right? And so that's really a strategy and planning setting type of exercise that you can do. And I think one of the things Amazon does to get everybody on the same page is still today, they use the original Amazon flywheel to articulate and rationalize, well, we've got an idea, how does that support the flywheel? And so it's just a way of kind of double checking their strategy.
So did you create a flywheel when you were launching the marketplace?
So we were modifying the flywheel through the marketplace because we were adding third-party sellers as a key component to the Amazon flywheel. And so at that point, part of the flywheel is about selection. Well, we really radically increase the amount of selection by increasing the number of sellers. So that's kind of how we use the flywheel and modified the flywheel. Part
3 of your book, you talk more about business and technology, recommending that companies do the math. Do the math. I'm assuming, is this budget? Is this really looking at the numbers before they launch?
Right.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so the concept of do the math is really about when you become a digital business, what you become rich in is data exhaust, right? Data being thrown off of everything.
Metrics.
Metrics. And once you have those metrics in place, then you can actually start taking the advanced level courses of, well, how do I create a formula for this process? How do I create an algorithm to optimize this outcome? How do I then feed into machine learning and artificial intelligence? That all requires that exhaust. And so do the math was kind of the concept we had at Amazon, which is you should be able to take almost anything, especially anything that's operational, has a flow to it, and be able to create a formula for that.
That makes sense. So when they say in grade school, it's important, and middle school, high school, really, when you get to algebra, it's important to learn your math.
That's right.
But I'm sure on a much more complicated, more complex level, you have your engineers and your mathematicians working on that.
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Sometimes it's amazing just by understanding, a process like, the order approval process or something like that. Like, well, what's the inputs? What's the outputs? What creates the velocity of that function? And trying to write out a simple algebraic function for it gives you some insights into actually, well, this is how this process actually works, and this is the type of improvement that might be helpful, and this is the type of metric that we should put in place. It doesn't always have to be complex math.
What's interesting to me is what you would think is it could be a simple idea, the amount of detail and thought and planning and strategy that it takes to really launch something. Like, how long did it take you to plan the marketplace launch?
Well, the thing I would say about that is Amazon, their techniques are about taking more time up front in articulating what our idea is, what is it going to take to do it, what do we envision the future being, before they start building something. And so it's kind of a go slow to go fast. And so by taking all of that time up front and the multiple iterations that are tough to predict how much time it's going to take, when they do decide to do something, then it goes much better because everybody's on the same page and we have clarity. And so their concept is called Start with the Customer and Work Backwards. I outline in the book kind of some of the core components of that strategy, using tools like writing narratives, writing future press releases, writing FAQs.
Talk that narrative, yeah, that's in part 4, which I love that Amazon didn't operate in PowerPoint.
Right.
It's narrative. Yeah, I want to hear more about this.
Yeah, so again, when you're in the ideation, the proposal phase, you know, what happens in most organizations, right? We use PowerPoint.
Oh,
somebody
index.
always
Oh my
index,
goodness.
right? And somebody always has to speak to the PowerPoint, right? Because it doesn't force completeness and clarity of thought, right? And clarity and clarity is really completeness and simplicity, right? And so by forcing teams to write narratives, complete sentences, complete paragraphs, complete concepts written to an audience to try to get a specific point across, that forces teams to think through things so much better. And then for the groups that need to read those narratives, force meetings to actually start with 20 minutes of silence, read the narrative. It's much more demanding for a leader to do that, but you'll make such better decisions and everybody's expectations. And it's also a key opportunity for a senior leader to go, oh, well, this is exactly how this should work, or this is the type of outcome we should have, or this should be the customer experience. And so that's a championship discipline. Like that is what I think is part of the new era of management, is being the product officer, like truly deeply understanding what is the future and how do we create that future, and having the discipline to write it out. And writing is an essential skill, and it forces you to be thoughtful and complete in those thoughts.
So you wrote a narrative for your marketplace?
We did.
Launch?
We wrote a narrative and a future press release for.
So it would read something like, give me an example of what that would sound like. I'm just curious. And when I think narrative as a journalist or media, I'm writing a story. So are you creating a story for the customer?
It's a story, but it's a business-oriented story that would talk about, you know, what the opportunity is, who are the customers. What would the seller, in the marketplace example, what would the seller experience and obligations be? What would the user experience be when they're discovering at Amazon, when they're checking out at Amazon, when there's customer service at Amazon? It's a 360 degree. All of that is articulated. And you know, just there was kind of one key sentence in the narrative and the future press release that we wrote. That was a third-party seller in the middle of the night, without talking to anybody, will be able to register, list an item, sell a product, and delight a customer as though Amazon, the retailer, had done it. That one sentence really was that top-level principle of how we were going to compete so much differently than the incumbent marketplaces at the time.
See, that resonates with me. If I were to read that in a PowerPoint, I don't think that would resonate and really hit home what that true experience, the customer experience should be. And
by having it written down, guess what? It can scale because it can be passed forward, and because it's a complete set of thoughts, you don't need the speaker there to explain it to everybody, right? And so it helps scale an organization through clarity of communication. Writing narratives. I think that's brilliant. I think writing should happen in all forms of business practice. You know, I would recommend reading the Amazon shareholder letters. They're some of the best learning material out there. And I think it's the 2017 shareholder letter where Jeff talks about writing narratives and that it is a learned skill. It takes practice. You have to be committed to the art form and don't expect it to be easy or perfect, especially starting off. But if you're committed to the process, you actually can learn the skill. You conclude your book with the half idea. So it's 50 and a half, challenging the reader. What is it that you hope your readers will take away from this playbook? To tease out the half idea, it really is about, this is how Amazon thinks about these topics, right? Here's 50 authentic, strategies, tools, mechanisms that Amazon uses and every day.
That you know have worked.
Have worked and everything. But the real question is, what are you willing to do? What are you as an individual and as a team willing to do differently? So back to like it's a big playbook. Pick a couple, commit to them, stick to them, figure out your version of them. But it's really about, all of this is for naught if you're not willing to put into practice and learn something new.
Thank you, John. Appreciate your interview.
Thank you. This was fun.
And that concludes our interview with John Rossman. Thank you for watching Sarder TV. I'm Lindsay Christian.